So I'll begin by introducing, I think, someone who, of all the speakers we're luckiest to have today, because in 4 days he needs to deliver a report to the Minister for Health. His review of mental health services and programs.
You thought he only had 3.
3 reports to the Minister for Health.
Yeah, there are.
So please welcome David Butt, from CEO of the National Mental Health Commission.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, albeit briefly. I do have to head back pretty soon. And yeah, it was good to know I had 4 days. I don't know. I thought I had to get it in by midnight Sunday, so there you go. Look, I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today as well, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and also acknowledge those of you here today with lived experience who contribute so much to our policy and directions and implementation and everything that we do in relation to mental health across Australia. And as I say, I can't stay because I have to get back and finalise the review to get it to the Minister and feed into the process there. There are, as I have noted in this year, as we've been developing the review of mental health services and programs across Australia, fairly high expectations about what this review will do and the implications for the system, which is good. I wish my IT department knew that, because I've been locked out of the system since 5 o'clock this morning and rung the help desk 4 times and they haven't been able to help. So, well, I want to say a little bit, as Josh says, just put, the sort of interface between the NDIS and mental health and what we're finding in the course of the review. And make it very clear, what we're presenting in the review is actually not a new mental health strategy or plan as such, albeit there may be a need for one, and that may come out of what comes out of what we recommend, but more a response to the terms of reference. And for those of you who've looked at terms of reference and been involved in various discussions around the country and provided submissions and so forth, strong focus there on the efficiency and effectiveness of existing programs, looking at overlap, gaps in service, particular focus on the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, rural health, looking at opportunities through e-health, fairly strong focus in all of that on understanding and dealing with the fiscal situation in which governments all around Australia, all around the world are facing. So in other words, it's not looking at actually expending heaps more money or anything like that. So in what we recommend, we need to look at, are we using the funds that we've got effectively? Are Commonwealth programs and services being leveraged to maximise impact and achieve the greatest public value in enabling a contributing life? The scope's very broad, so it is all about what does enable a contributing life. So it actually covers the breadth of not only health, of course, but things such as employment, education, housing, social welfare, justice system, what the states do, what the private sector do, what the non-government organisations do, the role of consumers and carers. Pretty monstrous. And it's been quite fascinating. In the process, the consultation, it's been quite a journey, and out of it we could actually be making hundreds of recommendations. I mean, we could go on and on about the sort of things that we found and the areas that need to change, but we won't be doing that. What we're getting back to is actually to focus on what are the systemic changes that we need to make to set the platform for an improved, thriving mental health system in the years ahead. So it's actually about what can we do now, what are the things that are the highest priorities, and then looking over time about how you build on those. There's lots of interesting things, none of it really surprising. I mean, the issues that you all know about in terms of difficulties of access, people getting over-medicated, over-medicalised, and others not getting any treatment at all or getting under-serviced, people keeping on getting given the same treatment over and over again when it's not working. A lot of focus on activity. If you look at the Commonwealth expenditure on mental health in Australia, it's about 9.6 billion, but a lot of it goes into things like disability support, pensions, carers payments, activity-based funding through acute hospitals, including, of course, standalone psych hospitals still in some states in particular, Medicare benefits payments and pharmaceutical benefits payments, most of them rising fairly rapidly except for the PBS, where In fact, it's pretty static growth in cost because of things like price disclosure and the fact that drugs are coming off patents, but our usage has been going up rapidly, and we're now the second highest users of antidepressants in the world, second only to Iceland, and our use of antipsychotics has quadrupled since 1990, even though the prevalence hasn't changed. So, I mean, not necessarily saying that our use of medications is not necessarily a good thing. The reality is we actually don't know, because we really don't know a lot about what we're getting for the things we're spending money on. We do have a very siloed system, so you still get the sicker you are, the harder it becomes to navigate the system. It's not really a joined up, integrated system. We have a range of programs, different roles and responsibilities between the Commonwealth and the states. Commonwealth funding new programs, particularly since the Collab Agreement of 2006, which was sort of parachuted in to fill gaps in services, but in some instances have actually created more silos. So a lack of a joined up system that's responsive and is focused on, that's got a person-centred approach and which wraps services around the needs of individuals, their families and support people, so all the sort of stuff you know. But on top of that, I think we really need to say and look at the reality that we've actually come a long way in the last 20 years. There has been a lot of change and we have seen a lot of improvements. We need more, but I think there have been a lot of improvements and a lot of innovation. So if you travel around the country, you meet all sorts of patches of innovation. Reality is it's obviously not consistent enough and people are not getting equity of access to the types of services they need to support them. So and a lot of it's a bit of postcode lottery. The rates of variation in access to services around the country, or indeed what services do. And if you just look at things like seclusion and restraint, the rates of variation in seclusion and restraint are just extraordinary around the country. So they're issues that I think are obviously very pertinent for us all. Seclusion and restraint, I think there's been a good focus on it over the last couple of years, and the National Mental Health Commission had quite a role in instigating that. But I think we face increasing concerns about what, in effect, you could label seclusion or restraint anyway, chemical restraint in relation to residential aged care facilities and the way we're dealing with our elderly people. I actually think if you look at the life stages of people as you go through the system and the impact of mental health, we're probably not doing enough at the start of life. I think there's particular issues about trauma for infants, young children, and the impact throughout life on that. We're doing more and more with adolescents, of course, and that's a good thing. Not necessarily saying that's not patchy as well. Adults, access issues again, but I think we're actually not really ready for what's happening with aged care. I think we're a long way from ready on that. So what we get back to is really that if you look at mental health, I mean, one of the striking things I've found is the level of agreement about the directions we need to go in mental health and what needs to change. I mean, there's a fairly clear consensus that we need to be focused more on prevention, early intervention and recovery. Yes, people need access to acute care and services at times, but they're getting too much, they're having too many times to have to go into crisis to get care. So a strong view about the need to actually focus on the needs of individuals, their families and other support people, to focus on prevention, early intervention and, as I say, recovery. Interesting though, if you look at that, that consistency of view has probably not been reflected or accepted at a government level, that there is actually a bit of a consensus on those directions, and possibly because the sector is seen as somewhat divided in how we go about implementation of that agenda, which is something that I'll come back to. So what we're looking at in our approach is really, as I say, it's not going to be a review up to government what they do with it, up to government whether they release it. But it's not so much about going through every issue that's been raised with us, and it doesn't mean necessarily that people will go to identify themselves in what we're recommending, because it is about systems reform and how do we develop that platform that is focused on a set of principles about how we should be making decisions about policy directions and funding, and build a platform on which you can then launch what you need to do in other areas of high priorities. So it's a bit like, I mean, I know there's been discussion about the NDIS being an airplane that's being built as it's flown. Interesting comment. I mean, we're actually not designing an airplane, we're actually, again, focusing on the directions that the aeroplane should be going in, and that we then need to build the parts of that to actually help it fly. and it's a great opportunity. I mean, I think we need to be very clear about that. I think the role that we've been able to play this year in looking at mental health and what direction reform needs to go in is a great opportunity that I think we should be looking at how we actually, even if we can't see everything that everyone wants in it, how to look at the whole picture and see how this actually creates that platform for going forward. On the relationship with the NDIS, I mean, it's obviously a fundamental interface that we've been looking at in mental health, and you're all aware of the issues that have been raised and the concerns that have been raised about the NDIS. I think we again need to say, look, this is a plane that's out there flying and is actually still being built. But if you think about, look forward and about what we want to achieve, we need to think, in 5 years' time, where do we want to be? And I think the NDIS is an extraordinary chance to change the Australian landscape in terms of what we can do for people with disability and people with psychosocial disability in terms of where we're coming from and mental health. So we need to have that long-term vision about where we want to be in 5 years' time and stick to that vision and prosecute and consistently drive on what we want to achieve. And I think that's what I would say about mental health in particular. We have not consistently and persistently said, this is where we want to go and this is how we're going to get there. And we're not going to be sort of taken off course by little things that come along or changes in policy or anything like that. We keep on being very clear about these are our targets, this is where we want to get to. And look at it as a change management strategy, because that's what it is. I mean, there's been lots of reviews, lots of reports about mental health. What we haven't had is a good change management strategy, and we're hoping that what we're providing actually provides a strategy for change, as opposed to saying this is what government should go away and do. And a change management strategy actually needs buy-in from everyone in terms of how do we actually achieve that over time. The views on the NDIS, I think what we've been getting through our consultations is a acceptance about that vision, but concern about how we are going and getting there. The views have ranged from this is the greatest thing ever to why are we doing this, why is mental health a part of the NDIS. We were a bit of an add-on, so is it the right place for us to be, and maybe we should be looking at something different. I keep coming back to this is a great opportunity and we need to maximise the opportunity. And it's interesting because, obviously a lot of the concerns that have been raised have been things about who's going to be eligible for Tier 3, what are you going to get as a package on Tier 3, and does that fit with the notion of someone who has got persistent and severe mental health disorders rather than being permanently disabled. Of course, one of the things that I've been getting feedback in the reviews from consumers saying, why would you want to say that we need to be on Tier 3 and therefore be saying that we're going to have a disability all our lives when what we're focused on is recovery? So you've got that sort of interesting quandary there. Not to say that we shouldn't be people on Tier 3. But there is the danger, as we know, about potentially unintended consequences in the decisions that were made in the design, and probably without sufficient understanding of what the potential impact was on people with a psychosocial disability. So they're the things that we need to be worried about, and I think some of the things that we need to be concerned about is that if we have got people where at the moment we've got uncertainty about what eligibility they're going to have, then it's interesting that there's this view about the need to rapidly rush into putting particular programs that are supporting people currently in the mental health system into the NDIS prior to actually understanding the numbers of people who are going to be in there and what support's going to be available either through Tier 2 or with alternative services that are sitting outside the NDIS, still being funded by state and federal government. So I think that is a particular issue. I know there's a view that in some of our programs, if you look at FAMS and some of the others, there's a view that there's actually been access creep over time, that there are people in things like FAMS who, in terms of strict eligibility criteria, may not have been eligible for it, and so therefore they may miss out when we go forward. I suppose the reason, what I would say about that is that people are going into FAMS in those cases where, quite frankly, there's probably been nothing else available. I mean, it's actually about providing services to people who are really in need, and there's actually no other alternative. So I think that needs to be taken into account, that if you take that away, you've still got the need, you've still got the people who actually need access to services, but you may not have the money to do that. So I know these things are being looked at. I'm glad Eddie Bartnick is having a look at this. I think it's pretty fundamental about actually doing that. I think from our perspective, and I won't be going into any recommendations about it, but we are making recommendations about the NDIS, but it's pretty clear in talking about it that if there's a need for urgent clarification about, what is the value of a Tier 2 payment? Is it a significant payment that's going to enable community support? And if not, what support is going to be available outside the NDIS to provide that support? I think that's a fairly fundamental question. And I think one of the things that we're struggling with is how soon we can get an answer on that sort of thing. So how do we actually recognise the eligibility? You therefore say, well, you have to think about the ideas of cashing out programs into the NDIS and whether at this stage and whether in fact we should be looking at, and you see other systems where the funding follows the individual. I mean, if an individual goes into the system, the funding goes with them, not necessarily the program. So there are sort of options that I think need to be looked at in it. I do think we need to actually have a pretty strong focus and trial in relation to psychosocial disability in the NDIS. I think something specifically there, and this is something no doubt Eddie will be able to talk about how he's going to go about recognising and dealing with these issues. There is an important factor here about consumer, and I'm not trying to put pressure on Eddie, notice we haven't got any already. And there has to be good consultation. I think that's an important part of that communication and consultation. I do think also that the needs of carers obviously has been coming up in the review, what's happening in relation to carers. In many ways, I mean, obviously, if the situation changes for carers who've spent a lifetime looking after people and suddenly their role has changed and yet they've been de-skilled and not been able to get in the workforce because of the fact that they've been carers, what levels of support are available there in terms of identifying their life opportunities and supporting them in fact into education or employment and staying in education and employment. And I think that's as much an issue for a McClure review of the welfare system and the relationship to employment as it is for the consumers of services. So I think that's a very important factor. In terms of, I'll just get back to touch on change management, and Josh touched on it about the statement that was put out last year. Change management is not a sort of thing that, okay, we've made a decision, we've decided to go in this direction and it's just going to happen. Lots of people have good ideas. Good ideas aren't always things that go into policy. Policy decisions are made, and I think the policy decisions at a high level on the NDIS are extremely valuable and something that we should be trying to maximise and use as best we can. It's the actual implementation that matters, because in a change management strategy, you have a vision, yes, but then you have a guiding coalition. You look at how people line up to achieve that vision. You have an implementation plan. You go for early wins. You try to make sure that you then cement those wins so that you get others on board. You present a combined face to the funders, in this case governments, how you actually speak with one voice and say to the government, these are the things that are important. How do we actually deal with those issues? So you get your early wins, you get your quick wins, you build on them, you cement your position, but you have a very clear long-term plan about how you're trying to get there. NDIS, same issue in mental health generally. Thank you.
We've got, sorry, here's my fault. We've got some roaming mics, I assume.
They're here.
Does anyone have any questions or comments today? Maybe while we're sorting out the mic issue and thinking about your question, I was just having a look at the terms of reference for your review, and it makes mention of the efficiency impacts of reporting requirements and regulation. I think that's of particular importance to the community mental health sector. I wonder where you're starting to land on that issue.
Can't tell you. The issue comes up. It's been a very important one about, and it's compounded by the fact that you've got states and territories and the federal government all funding organisations and federal government from often a great distance, so not necessarily responsive to what's happening on the ground, and sometimes, and obviously there have been funding of organisations where there hasn't been a strong enough focus on integration and coordination. It's often hard to integrate and coordinate when you've got two different sets of reporting requirements on different local boundaries and different time frames. So I think the sort of red tape issues, they do come into it at that level. So I think there are barriers to providing good integrated services that are wrapped around people. So it makes it much harder to be whole person focused when you've got that sort of disjointed approach. I mean, but one of the things we're looking at in the same context is waste, and I mean the biggest waste is not in those sort of areas. I mean, you can say there will be efficiencies and certainly more effectiveness if you can overcome those barriers. But the waste is really in providing the wrong treatment. So we're providing the wrong services. So we're wasting lots of money on acute services, crisis interventions, long stay, pharmaceuticals, medicalisation of people who could have been supported by other means. And we, as I say, we've got lots of examples where a person doesn't respond to a particular treatment, so they try the same treatment again and again and again. So, I mean, your real waste is in doing the wrong things. So the other issues are important, as you say, for NGOs, but it's actually how do you actually build up those services in the community to provide more comprehensive wraparound services. So again, we get back to you're trying to build that infrastructure at a local level around the needs of people. So you actually have to, and if you've got no bucket of money to actually spend more, then you need to see how you can shift resources away from acute care, the expensive end of the system, into those areas of the system that are going to stop people getting into the acute system, which is actually what is causing the waste.
We've got a question. Did someone already have a mic, or?
Thanks. I'm Anya Tierney. I'm from the ACT and I'm a carer and a consumer. I just wanted to say thank you very much for mentioning carers. Thank you. That was really terrific. I also just wanted to ask about people with multicultural and migrant background. You didn't mention them, but I know that you do think of them.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's not a specific term of reference, but it does come into it, of course, if you're going to have a population focus. And again, I think we come back to a population focus. I mean, what are the needs of specific groups? So people from multicultural background are part of that. I think we're dealing with issues in terms of LGBTI, we're dealing with issues in terms of age, and there's a whole range of areas where you'd say there are particular barriers of stigma and discrimination, but there are a whole other barriers as well. And again, we're getting back to not necessarily saying you need to do all these things about these particular groups and particular needs, but how do you actually reform the system generally so you are responsive at a local level and at a national level to the needs of particular groups and the areas that, as I say, we need to deal with. So it's systems change that then enables the platform to deal with particular things that may be occurring in relation to, as I say, LGBTI or migrants or whatever. Yeah.
Hello, Mike.
I can hear you.
My name's Helen Egan, I'm from the Northern Territory. You briefly mentioned Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Yeah.
30% of our population is on that group. So if you could speak a little bit more about that, and also if you have anything further on that difficult interface with aged care and the slightly more porous one with youth services.
Yeah. I mean, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as I say, it is a specific term of reference, and we've been getting particular specialised work done on it in relation to the response in that area. It's difficult, but there are models that work, and again, it gets back to how do you... I mean, a lot of the problems, of course, in relation to mental health and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are broad problems in terms of a whole range of stuff that impacts, of course, on physical health and mental health and a whole range of issues, and of course suicide, when high rates of suicide that are occurring among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so that's a specific area we're looking at as well in suicide. It is about trying to find evidence-based approaches that demonstrate that they are going to make a difference, because a lot of things that we've been trying obviously haven't been making a difference. Again, it gets back to how do you take a sort of whole of community, whole of system approach instead of, I mean, I'll use the National Suicide Prevention Program as an example. We've funded lots of little programs which have not necessarily been joined up and not necessarily evidence-based. There's been confusion between Commonwealth and state roles, confusion between what NGOs do and others do. You've got a whole range of issues in relation to the role of local councils, community clubs, schools, all those sort of things. And the approach that we really need to look at is how you bring them all together to provide a comprehensive response. So that's basically, at the core of it, it's actually saying, well, everything we're doing is to try and create a system that's based around the needs of individuals and communities and getting better health outcomes or better mental health outcomes and better outcomes, better wellbeing outcomes overall. So it's about bringing it all together. And your point's right about the interface issues. I think there are ways of dealing with that, which we'll be making recommendations on. I can't just go on.
Hi, Michael Tansky from Michael Projects in Brisbane. You mentioned that...
if you could just speak, I don't think the mic's...
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Michael Tansky from Michael Projects in Brisbane. You mentioned that you're particularly interested in looking at how to build more effective wraparound services, and particularly given the resources that are taken up in acute care, presentations, emergency and so on. Just wonder whether you had any ideas about or views about what those more effective responses might look like for people who are regularly reappearing in emergency departments, whom community organisations, mental health services, drug and alcohol services find very difficult to actually respond to. You know, the police are usually often the most frequent frontline service. These are people experiencing homelessness, diagnosed with ABI, for example, might have previous history of mental illness. Just, you know, that sort of hard end that everybody finds really difficult to work with. Just wondered whether you had any ideas, thoughts, views about how this review might more effectively address that population.
Yeah, look, Michael, I'm going to have to be a bit vague on it again. I mean, it gets back to similar principles that you actually look at the needs of different population groups and say what are the services that are going to support them to stay in the community and live contributing lives. So, and that's going to vary from individual to individual. The team that needs to be involved and the linkages that need to be involved will vary as well. I mean, although you can actually stratify population groups and say, well, these are the types of interventions that you need to have in terms of a stepped care approach or whatever you might be looking at. And again, in the sort of things you're talking about, I mean, you get back to what are the causes. So you get back to stable housing, stable relationships, and sort of what can you do about supporting people into education and employment, staying in employment. I think there's been a recognition that the current employment arrangements at the moment in Australia are not necessarily dealing with the type of people who would benefit from a small number of hours of work or from volunteering or whatever it might be. Again, it's how you actually do those things at a local level without the barriers that come from people working in different silos. So that's probably as much as I can say. And it's not as if in the report we're going to provide answers on those things. We're going to say you need to change the system so that you facilitate it for people at a local level to provide those responses that are best for those people.
Let's just make it one question, the last one, and perhaps you could keep it brief because I'm aware that we're nudging up against our next slot.
David, my name's Philip Dunn. I'm speaking later on today. I'm from the Barwon and West side.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word integration of services. I wonder whether you can make a comment about the way you perceive the NDIS opportunity and potential and the way that interfaces with the clinical system, and whether it is pursuing that goal of integration.
Well, I think that's, I mean, it's a really good question about how you do bring the two together. And in an integration sense, I'd be saying that you need I mean, you've got the NDIS, which is providing a range of services, then you've got the clinical services that do need to interface with it. I mean, ideally, you would actually not be dealing as in the NDIS system with multiple providers of those services. So you're actually looking at what sort of packages of care can be developed on a clinical basis that can be there to support them from a clinical perspective when needed. So again, it's about how you provide a package of services instead of a range of different services with different providers, which make it difficult to navigate the system.
I might leave it there and move on. Thanks, David, for making the time, and I wish you all the best with the huge task ahead of you, and I refer, of course, to being able to log into your machine. Please thank David Buck.